Hello, and welcome back to That AuDHD Teacher. So, I'm Emily, an early childhood teacher. I'm also a late diagnosed ADHD and someone who is really passionate about making neurodiversity easier to understand. This is very exciting because I have a podcast microphone now, which means I can actually film myself doing the podcast and hopefully have some better audio. So, today we're going to be talking about executive functioning. If you're thinking, is this something that actually applies to me? Think about if you've ever looked at a really simple job that you've got to do and you know you need to do it, but you just cannot start it, then today's episode is perfect for you. I will say before I start that executive functioning is something that I'm still learning about. I think in terms of my knowledge, I definitely have areas where I know a lot more. And this is an area where I know just a little bit less. So it's kind of cool that I get to unpack and explore that. So the term executive functioning is one of those phrases that gets mentioned all the time in conversations about ADHD and autism, especially around ADHD. And you might hear people say the phrases like they struggle with executive functioning or it's an executive functioning issue, but nobody actually really stops and explains what it means. That is my goal today. I really want to unpack what it is, why it's important, and how it affects everyday life, and why struggling with executive functioning isn't the same as being lazy or unmotivated or disorganized. So, I guess just breaking down some of those myths that people have around it as well. And I also like to just share a few examples from my own life because I think that's where the understanding actually comes in. And I think being late diagnosed, I look back at a lot of moments over my life and I go, oh, that explains so much. So make sure you're comfortable and let's get ready to explore together. So before we dive into what it is, I actually just want to acknowledge that executive functioning isn't exclusive to neurodivergent people. Every single human being uses executive functioning every single day. So you use it for things like planning your dinner, remembering an appointment, managing your emotions, or trying to prioritize things on your to do list. So every single person in pretty much every moment of daily life relies on executive functioning skills. The difference, though, is that some people's brains find those skills more effortful than others. And for a lot of people with ADHD and autism as well, those differences have a really, really big impact on everyday life. So let's unpack what executive functioning actually is. When I first heard the term, I thought it sounded really intimidating, and it actually took me quite a lot of research and deep dives into this topic to sort of understand it a bit more. It wasn't just something I could look up and understand it straight away. And I think the term itself sounds really intimidating just because it seems like this big clinical word that we maybe don't always hear. The easiest way to think about executive functioning is that it's your brain's management system. So it's the part of your brain that helps you decide what to do, when to do it, how to get started, and how to keep going until it's finished. So, in a practical sense, those things look like helping you plan your day, remembering your shopping list, switching from one task to another, being able to ignore the distractions happening around you. You use it to manage your emotions. Also, things like estimating how long things might take when you're sitting down to do a task, actually remembering what you're doing halfway through the task, and even using skills like being able to stop yourself from doing or saying something impulsively. So, every single human uses executive functioning every single day without even realizing it. We all know that I like to use analogies here because that's the way that I understand daily life. And I just think it's easier if you bring it into a sort of practical, realistic sense that you can actually relate to. If we imagine that you're baking a cake, for example, executive functioning helps you remember what you've already done. So, whether you've already added the eggs, it helps you follow the recipe in the correct order. It also helps you pre plan before the baking even starts. So, making sure you have the right ingredients instead of figuring it out halfway through. It helps you keep an eye on the timer while the cake is cooking while you're washing up afterwards. And it helps you stay focused to actually finish baking the cake from start to finish without getting distracted and wandering off into something else. So when we think about it, just one small task has so many different things behind the scenes, and that's what executive functioning helps us with. And I'm not saying people with executive functioning challenges can't bake a cake. It just means that their brain might have to work a lot harder to manage all of those different steps. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions. So people often look at someone who's struggling to start a task and they assume that maybe they don't want to do it, or they're just being lazy and they don't care about it. But wanting to do something and actually being able to do it are two totally different things. And that's not something that I think people really understand, because I can't tell you how many times I've wanted to do something, or I've known that I need to do it and I really want to do it, but I just can't do it. I will sit there and say to myself, why can't you do this? And it's one of those things that is super frustrating, because from the outside, if you're looking from another perspective, you might look at me and go, what is wrong with you, Emily? Why can't you just do this task? Because it looks so simple. And it's really, really hard to explain to other people why I can't do it, because I would love to just get started, get on with those tasks. And if I had like a special button in my brain that I could press to make me start, then I would. And I think that that is something that a lot of people with ADHD in particular can relate to. It's not always doing the task that's hard, it's actually starting it. Like, I have been thinking about recording this podcast all week, and, once I'm doing it, it's totally fine, but starting it is super, super hard. And the same with, I'm actually writing a few books at the moment. I'm writing a book that is really close to my heart. And sometimes I just cannot start writing it. Even if I have all these ideas in my head, it's just like trying to get over that invisible hurdle at the beginning that is the hardest part. There are a lot of myths out there, and I think it's so important to separate having motivation from executive functioning, because they're not the same thing. Motivation is wanting to do something. Executive functioning is having the mental process to organize yourself to actually do it. They are two completely different things. I wish that was something someone had explained to me many years ago. I think a lot of late diagnosed people will feel the same. We think back to particularly our school years, and we just think about all the times we were told off for not doing our homework or leaving something to the very last minute. And there was just such a lack of understanding, and I think it's really helpful now to sort of be able to bust down those myths and go back and think, "Oh my gosh, this is actually what was happening for me." Because I think I had a lot of self-criticism towards myself growing up, and now I sort of get to unwind that a little bit, and I can see the reasoning behind things, and I don't have to continuously ask myself, "What's wrong with me?" And I think it's really interesting to come from sort of a lens of curiosity now, knowing what I know now. And I can sort of ask myself, what is my brain telling me? What is my brain getting stuck with right now? One thing I also want to talk about as well is that executive functioning is not just one skill. It's a whole collection of skills that work together. Every single person on this planet has different strengths and different challenges. So you might find some parts of executive functioning easier and other parts harder. I have a few really close friends who also have ADHD, and their executive functioning looks completely different to mine. And I always find that really interesting. Not to get sidetracked, but I always thought I didn't have ADHD because I looked quite different from the other people in my life. But it's really interesting now that I get to see that we both have ADHD, but we just experience it in very different ways. So, the collection of skills that all work together for executive functioning. So, the first one is task initiation. This is one of the executive functioning skills that I know lots of people with ADHD really, really struggle with. And for me, it's kind of 50-50, because there are some things that I can start. When I have a deadline, I know I need to do something, I can start. But then there are times when I know I need to do something and I just won't do it. And it's funny actually talking about this, is I have a very easy task I need to do today. And it was literally setting up a meeting with one of our educators. And it seems so easy, but I just cannot make myself do it. But task initiation is pretty self-explanatory. It's literally the ability to get started. It sounds really simple because some people might be going, well, if you need to do something, just do it. But for some people, it sort of feels like there's this invisible wall that you just can't get through. And I know how frustrating that is. And again, it has nothing to do with motivation. It's just getting over that first hurdle. That's the really hard part. Number 2 on the list for executive functioning is working memory. So, working memory isn't about having a good memory, it's the information you're holding in your brain whilst you're using it. So, an example of this, and I think this is one that many, many people experience, is that they might be doing one task. For example, they might be hanging out the washing, but then once they've collected the clothes to go hang out, they notice something else on the way that needs doing. So they stop and they do that. And then the cycle just continues and you keep finding more things, but you forget about what you were originally doing. So you just keep doing all these little tasks. Meanwhile, you're leaving a trail of unfinished tasks behind you. I think that's the thing that a lot of people can relate to, actually. Obviously, working memory plays a huge, huge role in everyday life. And when it's under pressure, it can sort of feel like your thoughts are just disappearing. Number 3 on the list we have is planning and prioritizing. So, this isn't just about a to do list. This is about having maybe 10 tasks and your ability to decide which one happens first and in which order, because you need to decide what are the most important ones that need to be done first. So, for some people, the really hard part about this is not having a lot of things to do. It's finding where to begin and trying to figure out which one is more important, because sometimes everything on a list can feel urgent, right? And then it kind of just gets too overwhelming that you just can't start anything at all. I think that that's one of the big reasons that being able to break tasks into smaller steps is helpful for this. So, instead of thinking, I need to clean the whole house, breaking it into small steps would be, let's just start with emptying the dishwasher first. And then once we do the little tasks, it doesn't feel so overwhelming anymore. And that is definitely where a lot of people get stuck, because they have this big list and it feels really scary and overwhelming because they can't decide which one comes first. The 4th one on the list is time blindness. So, this is a term I hear thrown around a lot. Basically, it's a term that's used to describe difficulties around sensing the passing of time. When we sit down to do something and we think, okay, I'm just going to watch one video. This might happen when you're scrolling on TikTok a lot. It happens to me all the time. I go, I'm just going to watch a couple of videos for maybe 10 minutes. And then before I know it, 2 hours are gone and it doesn't feel like 2 hours have passed. Other examples of this can be you sit down to do something and you can be really, really focused on it and you have no idea that 5 hours have passed. So you have forgotten to eat, you've forgotten to drink, you've forgotten to go to the bathroom, all of these things because you just don't realize the time passing. Another thing that comes under time blindness is underestimating how long things will take. I often do this. So sometimes I will look at something and I'll be like, that'll take no more than an hour. And then it's like 3 hours later and I'm having to push back all of the other plans I had for the day because I just completely underestimated the time it would take. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that one as well. And time blindness is a funny one because I have experiences where sometimes I will sit down and do something and 2 hours will pass and I'll be like, what the heck? It feels like 5 minutes. But then sometimes you'll sit down to do something and only 5 minutes will pass and it feels like you've been there for an hour. There are obviously different strategies you can use for this, like using reminders or timers, being able to externalize your sense of time. But it's definitely something that I think a lot of people can relate to, and not just with ADHD and autism. I think lots of different people can relate to this as well. That's something I want to point out is, although my podcast is called The AuDHD Teacher, I do primarily talk about my experiences, what I experience as someone who has been diagnosed with ADHD and autism. But that's not to say that other people can't experience it, because they absolutely can. I just wanted to point that out there. But number 5 is cognitive flexibility. This is the last one I want to talk about. So, this is our brain's ability to adapt to things when they change. It might be a change of plans or a change in the way we're thinking or moving from one task to another. I think we all know that things don't always go to plan. You might have a particular day planned out and then something changes. And for a lot of people, it can just be mildly annoying. And for others, it can completely throw them off. I think for me, especially being autistic, this is one of the things I struggle with the most. If I have a really clear plan of how something's going to go and then it doesn't happen, I really struggle to adapt to that change. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't cope with it. It just means that I need more time to process it. I actually had an experience a few months ago. I'd been on the public waiting list to remove my gallbladder for quite a while. I got a call on a Friday afternoon saying I was scheduled for surgery on the Wednesday. And firstly, that threw me off because it felt like it was such little notice. But eventually I adjusted to the fact that I was going into surgery for Wednesday. I even had a confirmation email on Tuesday afternoon saying I was prepped and ready for surgery. I had everything planned. I had a friend who had taken the day off so she could take me to my surgery. I'd planned all my work things around it. And then at about 5 p.m. on Tuesday night, the surgeon called me himself and told me that I was not going to be having surgery. That was a really, really hard thing for me. I was on the phone to the surgeon for about 20 minutes, which I am surprised he gave me that long. I think I actually ended up hanging up on him in the end, but I was in complete meltdown mode by the time I entered that phone call. I think I had about a 3-hour meltdown that night. It was probably one of the most awful things I've ever experienced. And it had nothing to do with logic because I completely understood why they had to cancel the surgery. Just for me, the last minute change, especially when I had already had to change and get into that mode, which is very, very hard for me to do. I know for some people it might sound really dramatic, but if you too struggle with small changes, you will definitely understand how much of an impact that had on me. And it wasn't just that night either. I think for the next week, I was experiencing daily meltdowns because I just need a lot more time to adjust to change. And again, now knowing that I am autistic and ADHD, I have a better understanding of why these things happen. Whereas in the past, I know that I would have just been called a crybaby and that I was too dramatic. But now I know that it's actually my brain that just needs some time to recalibrate. But anyway, the reason I spent time explaining those 5 different skills is because I think we often reduce executive functioning to just being organized. But hopefully now you can see that it's so much bigger than that. It's all about how we start, how we plan, how we remember, and how we shift gears. If one or more of those things are harder for you, it doesn't mean that you're lazy or incapable. It just means that you need different support. And there is nothing wrong with that. So I would actually love to hear from you guys. So if you have different supports that you've put in place to help you with executive functioning, I would love to hear your strategies. I know that there are a lot of people out there struggling with this, and if they had a strategy that might work for them, that would just be awesome. I do just want to talk about what executive functioning challenges actually look like in real life, because I know I've talked about all these different things, but actually having an understanding of how it looks from real lived experiences can sometimes be helpful. And I think these are all experiences that everyone has had at some point, like whether they've lost their car keys or they've procrastinated or gotten distracted. The difference with this is how frequently it happens and how much it impacts your life. So imagine that you had 5 things on your list to do today. Might be replying to an email, putting the washing on, booking a doctor's appointment, paying a bill, and vacuuming the house, right? For someone who has really strong executive functioning skills, they can just prioritize and work through them one by one and then move on with their day, right? But for someone who has executive functioning challenges, looking at that exact same list might feel completely overwhelming. And it has nothing to do with how difficult the tasks are. It's just trying to prioritize those things and figuring out where to start. I like to think about it as having too many tabs open in my brain. I use that analogy every day because I literally just feel like I walk around with 1,000 tabs open and it just becomes overwhelming because it's like everything is competing for the same attention. Everything feels really important and urgent. And ironically, it makes it harder to do anything. So nothing gets done instead of everything. Another really common one is remembering appointments. You can have every intention to be at this appointment. You can write it in your calendar. You can set reminders. It can be a really important appointment and you still miss it. I know that this is one of those things where people see it as really disrespectful. And I totally get that because I'm definitely the kind of person that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it. So I really, really understand that viewpoint of it. But at the same time, I try really, really hard to understand the other side. And that's just because maybe that person's brain didn't keep hold of the information in the way that it should have. And I'm not perfect. I am guilty of this myself. I once had a call from the doctor's office saying, "Are you still coming to your appointment?" And I was like, "What appointment?" I had no idea that I even had an appointment. The supports to help that kind of situation, reminders, calendars, alarms, even things like visual schedules, but I know that everyone has their own way of dealing with these and different supports, and it's not a one size fits all either. Another thing that might be interesting is that executive functioning can also affect decision making. So, if you imagine you're standing in the supermarket and you're trying to decide which brand to buy, which is something we do a lot, and the choice can be really overwhelming, and you can be standing in front of that shelf for 10 minutes. And I know that some people will be like, come on, just make a decision already. But it's not the decision itself that's the overwhelming part. It's the different choices that become overwhelming. It's because our brain is trying to process so many different possibilities that it actually becomes mentally exhausting. Just another part of this that I want to quickly discuss, which I've kind of mentioned but not gone into, is the emotional regulation. Everyone experiences emotions differently, but the way that emotional regulation is part of executive functioning is that it helps us notice, manage, and respond to our emotions. So, for some people, emotions can feel really intense. I'm one of those people where I just feel things really intensely. And it takes me a lot longer to calm down after something's upsetting. And as I mentioned earlier, unexpected changes have a huge impact on me, and things just feel bigger than they might to other people. That doesn't mean that someone's too sensitive or too emotional, which are things I have heard my entire life. It just means that regulating those emotions require more effort. That's something that I'm still learning to understand because I feel like emotional regulation, there's so many different layers to it. There's so many different parts of me that impact on it. You know, I have all the different traits from autism that impact on it and ADHD, and trying to detangle it sometimes can be a little bit overwhelming. But I'm slowly sort of starting to understand how all of these things are working together. And I think it's always just going to be a continuous journey for me, especially as a lot of people will experience if they are like diagnosed, that you're basically just rewriting all your experiences from your life through this new lens that you now have. One thing that I do want to point out is that executive functioning doesn't mean that someone's not capable. It's really important to point out that a lot of people who are neurodivergent are super creative and they're great problem solvers. They can think outside the box and they're really innovative. It's important to remember, but it reminds us that the challenge isn't actually the ability to do any of those things. The ideas can be all there, the motivation can be all there, but then there's just days where it just feels impossible. And it can sort of seem inconsistent because one day you might be able to do something and then the next day you can't. And I think that's the part that people really struggle with because they're like, but you did it yesterday. But some days you just find it harder. And like everything, understanding goes a really long way because I think it also changes the way we talk to ourselves. I think it's pretty common knowledge that children with ADHD hear a lot more negative comments than their neurotypical counterparts. And as humans, we sort of take on that language for ourselves. So if we're hearing every day of our life that we're lazy, we start to believe that about ourselves. So having this understanding can sort of help us change the way we speak to ourselves as well. So instead of telling ourselves that we're lazy, we might be able to ask ourselves, what are we actually finding difficult and what can we do to help? Just even being able to identify what's hard. Like, are we finding starting the task is hard? Are we finding that we can't remember all the steps? Or are we just getting too overwhelmed by how big it feels? Because I think once we can identify what that is, then we can sort of start to help ourselves through it. And I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned since my diagnosis, and I'm still continuously trying to do this. I get told by my GP and my therapist all the time that I need to be kind to myself, and sometimes it annoys the heck out of me, but they are also really right. If we are able to replace that self judgment with curiosity, I think it makes such a big difference in how we talk to ourselves and actually our ability to do things. So, because we've talked about all the different parts of executive functioning and what it looks like, it's probably time to talk about what we could actually do about it. I think the best place to start with this is just knowing that we don't need to fight against our brain every day. And I think finding ways to work with our unique brain will make things a heck of a lot easier. So for me, I know that if I have information sitting in my head, I'm going to forget it. So I need to get it down. So whether that's sending a voice note to my friend, just telling them all of my crazy ideas, or writing a to do list, or just putting it in a diary, even if I don't look at it every day, the chances of me being able to remember that are a lot higher than if I didn't do those things. I think life is so busy, and especially when you come up against sensory challenges, trying to hold everything in your brain just doesn't work. I think finding a way that works for you. I know a lot of people have planners and they never ever use them, so that might not be your thing. But if reminders on your phone are a thing, or digital calendars, I know there are some really cool options out there now. Or if you're very old school and you like to write things down, just find a way that works for you. I also think if you are able to break things down into smaller tasks, then maybe it won't be so overwhelming. So instead of writing down clean the house, you might say empty the dishwasher, mop the floors, just breaking it into smaller steps. Or you could even make some fun little challenges out of it. Like you could be like, fold one basket of laundry. So not even doing all the laundry, just doing one part of it. I know I like to motivate myself with a reward afterwards. So I say, okay, I'll do this task and then I get this thing after. So just finding ways that work for your brain, I think. If there is a way for us to limit the amount of decisions we have to make in a day so that we don't get decision fatigue, do it, because we make so many decisions in a day. It's insane. If you just wear the same clothes every single day, do it, because if that means you don't have to decide what to wear, great. And I think that's also where routine actually comes in as important. Like if you have a time that you leave the house every day, you don't ever have to think about it. You just do it, right? So just having a look at your daily life and trying to figure out what you can do to sort of help yourself in that moment, I think is really important. Again, if you have anything that you do, I would love it if you left a comment because other people might find it helpful as well. But before we finish today's episode, I would like to leave you with a little reflection question. I guess I just want you to think about if there has been a task recently that you've been really hard on yourself about. Doesn't matter what it is, could be anything. Just thinking about that task and thinking about all the executive functioning skills that I've just talked about and sort of trying to figure out, is there something in there that's making that task harder to do? Sometimes we just need to think about it. And once we identify it, it will actually help us going forward. And again, understanding yourself, it just helps so much. I know it's helped me. So I just think it's the best place we can start. But thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. I hope it has helped you understand executive functioning and what it is and sort of bust some of those myths around it. If today's conversation resonated with you, I love if you followed That AuDHD Teacher on whatever podcast platform you listen on, as well as on social media. I am on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, although I haven't posted anything. And if someone came to mind today while you were listening, please, please, please share it with them because it means that I can help other people find these conversations as well. But until next time, just remember that different doesn't mean broken, it just means different. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.